Hey there folks, after that last video I did on steelhead fishing with beads, I had a ton of folks asking on how specifically to rig up hard beads for steelhead. And the reason I'm running hard beads and not soft beads is because this is a selective gear rules fishery, and I just don't want to have those complicated conversations with law enforcement regarding scent around soft beads. In the state of Washington, and I'm not so sure in Oregon, but I know in Washington salt is considered an added scent, but it's a common additive put onto a lot of plastics to impact the buoyancy. So that's why I just generally prefer to fish hard beads. All right, so let's dig into this rig. I'm going to go through everything from the very beginning. So the first thing I'm going to run is, of course, I need a float because I run my beads under a float. Generally for steelhead fishing, 3/8 ounce is my go-to slip bobber weight. Although if I'm going to be fishing where it's more turbulent, higher water situations or deeper, I might fish up to 1/2 ounce, but I really like the 3/8 ounce. I'm going to match that with an inline swivel weight of the same matching weight. So you got to tie that in all together. Then you can buy these little kits of pre-made bobber stops that comes with a bunch of little beads too. And you'll be using those today. So I'll get out my bobber stop. You can use the rubber silicone style ones. I just like these ones. I find they're a little bit easier to loosen up and move up and down as I adjust the depth at which I'm fishing on the river. I run 30-pound Power Pro as my main line, my preferred main line for float fishing, and I use a high vis line, not only for myself to help myself in mending, but also when I'm fishing around other people. It is the Northwest. We are combat fishing. If you're steelhead fishing in most places, you're not going to be alone. By having a high vis line, it actually helps all the anglers around you as well, and it doesn't really impact the bite. So we're going to go ahead and slide this on. I've also used Fireline, which is really hydrophobic, so it's easier to mend than Power Pro, I would say. But it also tends to degrade faster. It gets like really roughed up and has lots of little lines sticking off it, and especially if it gets cold and you get freezing temperatures and you're fishing for steelhead, they tend to ice up a little bit worse than Power Pro in my opinion after it's been roughed up a bit. So first thing we do is we're going to just put that bobber stop on there, tighten it up. You can trim these tag-in lines down a little bit if you want to. Most of the time I'm not fishing deep enough that I really need to worry about bringing that up through my guides, but if you are, you can trim that. Then we're going to add one small bobber stop bead, which is just really tiny little, like 4 or 5 millimeter bead on the line. That's going to act as the bobber stop. You can put like an additional bigger corky or bead on top of here if you need some increased visibility. It's also really good for beginners because if the corky or the bead is laying off of the side, that means your gear isn't properly deployed. But right now I'm fishing really low clear water, so I'm trying to minimize splash and just the overall visual presentation that's floating above these fish. So I'm just doing it straight to the bead. So I got that's going down. It's going to peg on that bead right there. I always put a bead underneath, especially because these bobbers, which I like, have a reinforced, these are the arrow floats. They have a little metal ring here on the bottom. That's great for reinforcement. It also helps the line slide through easier, but that means it's going to be smashing on your knot every time. So having a bead here below that to act as a buffer is a really good idea. So I'll go ahead and put that on. So otherwise, this is just like how I would set up for jig fishing, except after we get past the weight, it's going to change. And I'm going to go ahead and tie in my inline swivel weight. You can use whatever terminal knot you're comfortable with. I almost exclusively use San Diego Jam for the vast majority of my knots. And for efficiency's sake, I'm going to wait to trim all my tag-ins until the end of this video. All right, so there's the swivel inline weight. Now for leader material, generally low clear water like I'm fishing right now, especially here in the Upper Columbia and in Idaho, I tend to prefer 8 to 10 pound fluorocarbon. If I'm in heavier like coastal rivers, I'm going to switch up to 12 pound. It really depends on where you fish. If there's a lot of boulders and down timber, 12 or even 15 might be a better option, but I do find the lighter the line I get, the more bites I get, because it allows that bead to free float and act more naturally under the water. I do prefer fluorocarbon because of its higher abrasion resistance, but also it's a light transmission, it's harder for the fish to see, and lastly, its density. It's got a higher density, so it sinks. It just helps present the bead a little bit better. So generally I'm going to go to around a 24 to 30 inch leader of fluorocarbon. I just like the red label from Seagar. It's cheap, works great. And then for my hook, I'm going to snell my hook on first. I use size 1 or size 1/0 Gamakatsu finesse wide gap hooks. I like that wider gap. I just find to get a little bit better hookup with these fish, especially when bead fishing. I'm just going to snell this on here very quickly. 8 or 9 wraps, and then come back through the top. You can do an egg loop if you want to. I'm comfortable with my snells. They never come undone for me. Okay, so we got the snell knot. Now we're going to take our beads. So I just carry around my beads along with all my jigs in these little packets. In general, hard beads, I'm going to run anywhere from 6mm up to 12mm. I would say like 10 is probably my go-to size, and I really like these ones with like the blood dots on them. I just run trout beads, hard beads. I find they're very effective. They have a bunch of different colors. My best colors are the darker reds, oranges, and later in the season I'll do better with the yellows and whites, which look more like unfertilized eggs that are washing down the river. Some guys fish giant, like 14, 16mm beads and tear them up too. So it's just personal preference. So I'm going to slide that bead down. Now right now it's just free sliding, and I know some anglers who fish it like that. They just let it free slide against the hook. I definitely do not. I peg my beads, and I use silicone pegs. They come in clear or black. I don't think the fish care because you're going to trim them, but just a little silicone peg. And you can use rubber bands even and trim them down. And what I'm going to do is slide that peg up through the bead and pull it all the way through. Tighten up that connection with the line, and basically it's going to hold it there. And then you can trim away your excess. So you can see there's some of the silicone sticking out of the bead. You do want to clean that up. Just to give it a more natural presentation. I don't know if steelhead are really that intelligent, to be honest. I mean, they eat plastic worms, for goodness sake, but we'll go ahead and clean that up. And so there you have just the bead right there. It's stuck on the line. It can't move. In general, I'm going to run them about 3 inches, 2.5, 3 inches above the hook. So this is what happens is the fish comes up to eat this bead, and they tend to be very excited about taking in beads. They want to eat them deep. They swallow that, and then this will catch them right in the corner of the mouth a lot of times. Or you'll see the bobber go under, and as you pull this through, it'll come back up and catch them right on the nose. I don't know how many times I've nose hooked them on beads. So then I'm going to tie this leader into my float, or into that inline weight, right? I like to pre-tie like about a half dozen of these before I go out and hit the river. That way if I snag up or break off, or my leader gets abraded, I can change out really quickly. Again, just San Diego jam knot. Okay, we're almost done. What we're going to do next, though, is I'm going to add a split shot. I go at least 3/0 or heavier. Generally heavier than 3/0, but you can do like 2 little 3/0s scattered up and down your leader, but I like a larger size, maybe 1 or 2 sizes larger. I put that about halfway down the leader and crimp that on to the leader material. So basically what I'll have is the inline weight split shot halfway down the leader, and then the bead pegged 3 inches above my hook. Okay, I'm gonna quickly clean up my tag ends. Okay, so let's review that. We got our bobber stop on our main line, which mine is 30-pound Power Pro. A small bead that goes to my float. Another small bead below that. My inline weight, which is matched perfectly to my float. Then we've got a 24 to 30 inch leader of fluorocarbon, anywhere from 8 to 15 pounds, depending on your personal preference and the fishery you're in. Halfway down that, we've got a split shot right there, down to a pegged bead, and then my size 1 or 1/0 Gamakatsu finesse wide gap hook. Now, how do you fish these? Basically, it's not like jig fishing where you're trying to have that jig, you know, above the fish or right near their eye level. I like this bead to be pretty much banging on the bottom as it's going down. So when I'm drifting this, I'm actually looking for my bobber to every once in a while sort of tip forward. That's this split shot tapping on the bottom on boulders. And then that means that that bead is just floating around down there. It's neutrally buoyant. It's just floating around like a dead, free-flowing egg going down the river. And that is when I typically get my bites. It's pretty rare that I get bit when I just have sort of that perfect vertical orientation that I'm looking for on a jig. With this, every once in a while, I want to see that tap. I don't want to see it bottom dredging. You know, this isn't bobber dogging, which is a different rig. You know, I don't like to see my bobber like constantly like dunk, 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 that I'm going to snag up. But every once in a while, just you'll see that bobber tip forward. It's catching on that split shot. That's perfect. Anyways, definitely give them a shot. I was not a believer in them until one year I just like, you know what, I'm going to run these just 3 to 5 casts with a bead rig behind holes that I'd, you know, just pounded with spinners, spoons, and jigs. I can't believe how many fish I was pulling out in areas that I had just absolutely beat to death. So they do absolutely work. You don't need to add scent or anything to them or bait. Just plain bead. All right, I'll put links to everything I use below. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section, and I'll get back to you. And just remember, fish smarter, not harder. Bye, guys.